Michael Jordan secretly buys the house he grew up in, then lets strangers live there rent-free. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Michael Jordan had long been known as a man who dominated the basketball court, whose name echoed through stadiums and left an indelible mark on the world of sports. But in Wilmington, North Carolina, where it all began, the story of Jordan was more than just about the basketball legend. It was about the boy who had grown up in a modest neighborhood, where dreams were built in small rooms and on cracked courts. Michael's childhood home still stood on East 12th Street, a simple structure with faded paint and a worn-out yard, where he had once shot hoops in the backyard, oblivious to the greatness that awaited him. It was in this home where Michael found the roots of his ambition. The house wasn't much to look at, but to him, it held everything. It was where he had learned the value of hard work and dedication from his family, particularly his mother, Dolores, who never let him forget the importance of humility. His father, James Jordan, Sr., taught him that winning wasn't just about talent, it was about giving everything you had, even when you thought you had nothing left. As Michael grew, so did his ambitions. The house on East 12th Street, where his dreams had started, became a symbol of everything he wanted to accomplish. But over the years, that house had fallen into disrepair. What had once been a home filled with the energy of a young athlete chasing his dreams now stood empty, its wooden siding weathered, its windows dirty with time. The yard, once alive with the sounds of basketballs bouncing, had become overgrown, and the air that once smelled of fresh ambition now felt still. Despite his worldwide fame and fortune, Michael Jordan hadn't returned to this house in years. He'd been so focused on his career, his championships, his legacy, that Wilmington had become a distant memory. But that didn't mean it was forgotten. Every once in a while, when the weight of his accomplishments seemed too much to bear, he would think back to his roots, the house where everything began. Then, one day, Jordan decided to return. It wasn't public, and it wasn't for a special occasion. It was a quiet decision, one that no one but a few trusted people knew about. Michael Jordan, who had built his entire life around success and public adoration, had a secret. He had secretly purchased his childhood home. No fanfare. No press conference. Just Michael and the house that had shaped him. The decision to buy the house was personal. Jordan didn't need the house to remind him of where he came from. He didn't need any more accolades or trophies. But this house had a story, and he wanted to preserve it, not just for him, but for the community that had always supported him. For weeks, no one knew about Michael's plan. The house was still in disrepair, a quiet relic of a past that had been overshadowed by his global fame. But for Michael, it was never about the structure itself, it was about the memories, the lessons learned, and the feeling of standing in the place that had shaped him. He could already picture it in his mind, the basketball hoop out back, the smell of his mother's cooking in the kitchen, the sound of his father's voice encouraging him to push harder. It was all here, in the house that had started it all. In the meantime, the house was still being lived in by a family who had rented it for years. They had no idea who the previous owner was, much less who Michael Jordan was. They were just an ordinary family trying to make a living. They had no connection to the man who had once lived there, and they certainly didn't expect to ever cross paths with him. But that would change in a way no one could have anticipated. After Michael purchased the property, the restoration work began. It wasn't just about fixing up a rundown house, it was about bringing back a piece of history. The walls would be restored, the floors refinished, the yard cleaned up. But there was something more than just restoration happening here. It was about bringing life back to a place that had once held so many memories. Jordan didn't want the house to be just a place he visited when he felt nostalgic. He wanted it to be a place that others could experience, feel the same connection to, and perhaps understand a little bit of who he was. But before the work could begin, Michael had one more thing to do. He needed to tell the family who was living there. They had no idea they were about to be caught in a whirlwind of emotions, surprises, and life-changing events. The day he planned to visit, Michael wasn't sure what to expect. Would they be upset? Would they feel awkward knowing that the house they had been living in now belonged to someone so famous? It didn't matter. He had made up his mind, and he was ready to face whatever came next. Michael Jordan, in all his fame, was about to make an incredibly personal decision, one that would change the lives of a family in ways they could never have imagined. He wasn't just returning to Wilmington to relive the past. He was returning to make a gesture, a quiet act of generosity that would reflect everything he had learned on his journey from a young boy dreaming of basketball greatness to the icon he had become. As he made his way to the house, his mind wandered back to the times when he had played in the driveway with his brothers, when he had been rejected by his high school basketball team, when he had experienced the pain of failure before finding his greatness. All those memories rushed back as he pulled up in front of the house. It was still there, standing strong, and for a moment, it felt like nothing had changed. But it had. The house was his now. And he was about to do something unexpected. Something that would show the world, and the family living there, that the man who had conquered the world had never forgotten where he came from. Michael Jordan sat quietly in his car, looking at the house where it all began. His childhood home stood there, just as it had all those years ago, only now, it was no longer his. He had bought it back, of course, but this place was more than just a building. It was a part of him, a part of his history, a reminder of the struggles, the sacrifices, and the dreams he had as a young boy. His fame and fortune had long since taken him far from Wilmington, North Carolina, but this house remained as a solid anchor to the past. Michael didn't need a mansion or another trophy room. What he needed was to reconnect with the things that had shaped him. The house was a piece of his story, and in a way, it felt unfinished. He had accomplished so much, yet there was something about returning to his roots that seemed vital. The world knew him as the greatest basketball player ever, but few knew the struggle of a young boy who wasn't always destined for greatness. There had been failures. There had been moments of self-doubt. He had been cut from his high school basketball team. He wasn't even a first-round draft pick. No one expected the heights he would reach. But now, here he was, standing at the crossroads of past and present. The house looked much like it had when he left, though it had taken on an air of neglect. The lawn was overgrown, the front porch sagged a little, and the paint was fading. But it was home. It would always be home. For Michael, basketball had been the way out. The game had offered him a way to prove his worth, a chance to leave behind the small-town life. But in the process, he had built a legacy far beyond anything he ever expected. He became a cultural icon, known around the world. His life had changed in ways that no one could have imagined back when he was just a kid practicing his jump shot on this very driveway. Still, there were parts of him that longed for the simplicity of those days. In this house, he was just a kid, no fame, no endorsements, no pressure to live up to the impossible standard of greatness. But he was also Michael Jordan, the name that would come to represent excellence, ambition, and unrelenting willpower. The balance between the man he was now and the boy he had been always lingered somewhere deep inside him. The decision to buy this house wasn't made on a whim. Michael had spent years thinking about it, but it wasn't until recently that the idea had become clear in his mind. As he looked back on his career, he realized that the drive to be the best had always been rooted in this place. Here, in the small, quiet neighborhood, he had learned the fundamentals of hard work. He had learned the value of family. He had learned the importance of persevering even when things didn't go the way he wanted. The world may have seen the championships and the dunks, but it all started right here. It wasn't about reliving the past or trying to reclaim lost time. It was about making sure that this house, this piece of his story, was never lost, never forgotten. He wasn't just buying a property. He was preserving a piece of his identity. He wanted to honor his roots, not just for himself but for everyone who had supported him along the way. And then there was the family. The house was currently rented by a family that had no idea who Michael Jordan was. They had been living there for years, going about their lives without ever imagining that the house they called home was once the birthplace of a global icon. They had no reason to know that the young boy who had once called it home would one day go on to achieve more than most people could ever dream. Michael wasn't sure what to expect when he met them. Would they be surprised? Would they feel uncomfortable? He couldn't predict how they might react, but he knew that this was the right thing to do. He had the means to help them, and he knew this was something that could have a lasting impact on their lives. It wasn't about giving away money or offering charity. It was about making a difference in a way that felt personal, that felt connected to who he was and where he came from. It was clear that the family had no idea who had bought the house. In a way, Michael found that comforting. He wasn't doing this for the attention. He didn't need their praise or acknowledgement. He didn't need the world to know that he was helping them. He just needed them to understand that they had been given a gift, a piece of something much larger than themselves. But Michael also wanted to keep the moment intimate. He didn't want to make a spectacle of it. The family didn't need a big celebration or fanfare. All they needed to know was that their lives were about to change, in a way they couldn't possibly understand at that moment. The day he planned to visit them, Michael was nervous. He wasn't used to being vulnerable, even in a personal sense. But something about this felt different. This wasn't about basketball or fame. It was about honoring the past and making sure the people in this community felt the impact of his success, not just through his charity, but through a gesture that was deeply personal. As he walked toward the door, his heart raced. He wondered what the family would think, how they would react. He had no real expectations, but he did have hopes. Hopes that they would see this for what it was, an act of kindness that would change the course of their lives. Hopes that they would appreciate the gesture, not as something grand or showy, but as something real. When the door opened, the family seemed a little taken aback. After all, who wouldn't be surprised when a man like Michael Jordan shows up unannounced at your doorstep? But Michael wasn't there to make an entrance. He was there to make a difference. The moment wasn't about the recognition. It was about the connection. He wasn't the superstar. He wasn't the legend. In that moment, he was just a man, reconnecting with the past, trying to give something back to the place that had shaped him. This wasn't a public stunt or a marketing move. This was Michael Jordan, at the crossroads of a lifetime, giving back in the most personal way he knew how. It wasn't about wealth or fame, it was about the simple, unspoken understanding that sometimes, the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to live with a little less worry and a lot more peace of mind. As Michael spoke to the family, explaining what had just happened and why he had done it, the shock began to fade. There were no grand speeches or over-the-top reactions. There was just gratitude and disbelief. The family had no idea that the house they had been renting was now theirs to keep, free of charge. It was a quiet gesture, but one that would echo throughout their lives. Michael left that day feeling a sense of peace that he hadn't expected. He hadn't come to make headlines. He had come to connect with the past and give something back to the people who had shaped him. And for the first time in a long time, he felt as though the legacy he had built was no longer just about basketball. It was about something deeper, something more lasting. It was about making a difference, even in the smallest of ways. The restoration of Michael Jordan's childhood home began quietly, away from the public eye. No reporters, no cameras, just the sound of hammers and drills as workmen began the process of bringing the house back to life. For Michael, this wasn't a publicity stunt or a way to flaunt his wealth. This was something far more personal. He didn't need a reminder of where he had come from, but he wanted to ensure that the place where his dreams began was preserved, not just for himself, but for the neighborhood and for the generations that would follow. The house, which had stood for decades, had aged. Time had left its marks in the form of cracked windows, peeling paint, and a yard overtaken by weeds. Yet, there was something about it that made Michael feel grounded. It was a symbol of his roots, his foundation, and the quiet moments he had spent there in his youth, dreaming of playing in the NBA. Despite its worn appearance, the house still held the essence of what had shaped him. As the workers started their tasks, Michael didn't hover over them or micromanage. He understood that the process was bigger than any one individual. This was about honoring the house, the place that had witnessed his family's struggles and triumphs. It wasn't about grandeur, it was about authenticity. The house had to be restored to its original condition, not upgraded or modernized. Every corner of it needed to reflect the simple yet powerful lessons of his childhood. The workers started with the exterior. The walls were scrubbed and repainted, the faded shutters given a fresh coat of paint. The yard was cleared of overgrown shrubs and grass, the basketball hoop cleaned and straightened. The sense of nostalgia was strong in the air. As they worked, Michael's mind wandered to the memories of his younger days. He recalled the countless hours spent shooting hoops, practicing his form with a level of dedication that only someone with a dream could understand. It wasn't just the game that shaped him, it was the process, the drive to improve, to always be better. The workmen couldn't know how much those same hoops had meant to him, how they had transformed him from an uncertain teenager into the fierce competitor he became. During the restoration, Michael made occasional visits. He didn't want to be in the way, but he couldn't help but observe the progress. Every time he stepped through the front door, it felt like he was coming back to a different era, one where everything was simpler and the only goal was to play basketball and be the best. There was no fame, no spotlight, just a family trying to get by, and a young boy who was determined to do something bigger than anyone could imagine. As the weeks passed, the house began to take shape. It wasn't just the physical structure that was coming back to life, it was the spirit of the place. The sound of footsteps in the hallway, the scent of home-cooked meals in the kitchen, the warmth of family, it was all slowly being restored. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. Michael had long since realized that perfection was an illusion. What mattered was the effort, the dedication, and the commitment to the process. This restoration wasn't about creating a picture-perfect replica of the past. It was about preserving the essence of what had once been. But Michael didn't just focus on the house itself. He knew that the impact of this restoration would be felt by the entire community. Wilmington had always been a small town, and while it had supported him during his rise to fame, it was often overlooked in the grander narrative of his success. Michael had always appreciated the quiet strength of his hometown, the people who had helped him when no one else believed in him. This restoration, he knew, would mean something for the town as well. It wasn't just about the house, it was about showing the people of Wilmington that they were part of something bigger than themselves. Michael's success wasn't just his own, it was a reflection of the place that had nurtured him, and this was his way of giving back. There were moments during the restoration when Michael would sit on the porch, looking out at the street, lost in thought. The world had changed around him, but here, in this neighborhood, time seemed to move slower. He could hear the laughter of children playing in the street, the sound of basketballs bouncing against driveways. It reminded him of the days when he, too, had played without a care in the world. In a way, it felt like coming full circle. He had spent his career chasing greatness, always striving for something more, but here, he was reminded of where it all started. He realized that no matter how far he had come, this place would always be a part of him. It was the foundation of his success, the quiet force that had shaped his ambition. As the house neared completion, Michael began to think about the next step. It wasn't just about restoring the property, it was about what to do with it once it was finished. The house wasn't meant to be a museum. It wasn't a place to showcase trophies or awards. It was meant to be a home, a place where memories could continue to be made, just as they had been in the past. The decision to let the family who had been living there continue to stay was an easy one. Michael had always believed in giving back, and this was his way of doing that. He wasn't just giving them a house, he was giving them the freedom to live without the burden of rent. He wanted them to be able to experience the same sense of security and peace that he had felt growing up here. It wasn't about money or recognition, it was about giving someone else the opportunity to live with the same stability he had once known. When the house was finally finished, it was a strange feeling for Michael. He had seen it evolve from a rundown structure into a home that felt vibrant and full of life. But it wasn't just the physical transformation that had struck him, it was the emotional significance of it all. The house had been restored, but more importantly, a connection had been made. This house, which had once symbolized his past, now symbolized something bigger. It represented the continuity of dreams, the passing of lessons from one generation to the next, and the idea that no matter how far you go, you should never forget where you came from. The final touches were put in place, and the house stood proudly once again. But for Michael, the real work had just begun. The restoration wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a new chapter. This was his way of ensuring that the legacy of his childhood, the lessons he had learned, and the spirit of his hometown would never be lost. It wasn't about fame or recognition, it was about creating something lasting, something meaningful, something that would stand the test of time, just as the lessons of his youth had. With the house restored and ready, Michael's mind turned to the next step, the quiet act of generosity he had planned. It wasn't about fanfare or celebration, it was about making sure that the family who had lived there would be able to stay, to continue their lives in a home that had meant so much to him. It was a gesture, but it was one that would echo for years to come. In his own way, Michael Jordan had come full circle. The day Michael Jordan had planned to meet the family living in his childhood home was unlike any other. There were no cameras, no press releases, just a simple intention to give back, to show the world a side of him that few had ever seen. The workers had just finished the final touches on the house, and as Michael stood on the porch, the house looked exactly like it had when he was growing up, only now, it felt more like a home than ever. The front door was polished, the lawn manicured, and the basketball hoop stood tall, as if waiting for a new generation to come and play. It was late afternoon when he decided to visit. He had already spoken to the family once, but the full details of what he had planned to do hadn't fully sunk in. Michael wasn't expecting anything spectacular, he wasn't expecting thanks or grand gestures. He simply wanted to make sure they understood what he was offering them, a life without the weight of rent, the chance to stay in a house that had once been his, a house that had shaped him into the man he became. As he approached the door, his heart raced a little. It wasn't the same feeling as stepping into the locker room before a championship game, but it was close. This was personal, and for Michael, that made it far more significant. He wasn't there to meet a group of reporters or to deliver a statement. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He simply wanted the family to understand the gesture, to recognize it as something meaningful. The door opened slowly. A woman, probably in her late 30s, stood before him, clearly surprised to see the man who had just introduced himself over the phone. She looked at him for a moment, unsure of what was happening. Michael smiled politely, introducing himself again, confirming that he was indeed the man who had bought the house. Her reaction was a mix of shock and confusion. She must have thought this was some kind of mistake, that perhaps someone had misrepresented themselves. But when he explained that he had bought the property for them, so they could live there without having to pay rent, her face changed. The smile that crept across her face was hesitant at first, then it became more genuine as the weight of what he had just said began to sink in. Michael wasn't one for long speeches. He never had been. He'd always been more comfortable letting his actions speak for him. But in this moment, he realized that the words he was about to say mattered. This wasn't about making a grand gesture. It was about offering them the security and peace of mind that he had been fortunate enough to have. "I know this place has been home for you," he began, his voice steady but sincere. "And I want to make sure it stays that way. I bought the house. It's yours now. You don't have to worry about paying rent anymore. You're welcome to stay here for as long as you need." The words hung in the air for a moment before the woman spoke. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice almost trembling. She looked around, as if she needed reassurance that the house had truly changed hands. Michael nodded, reassuring her that everything had been taken care of. It wasn't a joke, it wasn't a publicity stunt, it was just a gift. The woman looked over her shoulder, calling for her husband to come into the room. He appeared in the doorway, clearly as bewildered as she had been. Michael repeated what he had told his wife. This was their house now, free of charge. They didn't have to worry about rent, utilities, or moving. It was a surreal moment for the couple. They had never expected anything like this, least of all from the man who had once lived in the very house they had called home. The husband stood silently for a moment, processing the words. Then he shook his head. "You don't know what this means to us," he said quietly. His voice cracked with emotion as he spoke. "We've struggled, we've made it work, but this changes everything." Michael smiled, but he could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't about grandiose gestures. It wasn't about being recognized for his generosity. It was about making sure that this family, who had unknowingly lived in a piece of his history, would now have the chance to live their lives with a little less stress, a little more stability. For Michael, that was more important than anything else. As they stood there, Michael could see the gratitude in their eyes. The husband shook his hand, his grip firm and full of thanks. Michael had seen that same look from teammates, from opponents, from fans over the years, but this felt different. There was no camera, no audience, just a quiet exchange between two people who understood what was at stake. This wasn't about money. It was about kindness. It was about taking a step back and saying, "This is the right thing to do." "Thank you," the wife said, her voice soft but full of emotion. This is more than we could have ever imagined. We don't know how to thank you." Michael didn't need thanks. He wasn't there for the applause. This wasn't about recognition, it was about giving them a chance. A chance to stay in a house that had meant so much to him, to his family, to a community that had supported him from the very beginning. He didn't want them to feel burdened. He wanted them to feel at home. "I just want you to know," Michael said, his voice steady, "that this is something personal. It's not about what I've done, or who I am. It's about this house. It's about what this place means. It's about you and your family. You deserve a chance to live here without worrying about rent." The couple nodded again, their faces softening. They didn't know how to respond. They were still processing the magnitude of what Michael had just done. But Michael didn't stay long after that. He wasn't looking for a moment of fame. He had done what he came to do. He had made sure that the family knew the house was now theirs, that they could live there without worry. As he turned to leave, he looked back at the house one more time. It wasn't about nostalgia. It wasn't about reliving the past. It was about creating a future, one where the people who had made this house their home could continue to live with peace. For Michael, that was enough. This wasn't about the world knowing what he had done. It was about what he had done for them, for the family that had unknowingly become a part of his own story. When he drove away from the house that evening, Michael felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't expected. It wasn't the same as winning an NBA championship or sinking a game-winning shot, but it felt significant in its own right. In that moment, he knew he had done something that went beyond basketball. It was a quiet, personal act, a gesture that reflected the man he had become, not just the basketball legend he was known as. And as the car pulled away, Michael realized that this was the kind of legacy he wanted to leave behind, not just a story of basketball greatness, but a story of kindness, of giving back to the place that had shaped him into who he was. In the weeks that followed Michael Jordan's meeting with the family living in his childhood home, the word began to spread. However, unlike the usual headlines surrounding his every move, this wasn't about him being seen in a new light or gaining even more attention. The public had become accustomed to his grandeur, his championships, and his well-known persona as a global icon. But this story, the one about his quiet generosity, wasn't about headlines or accolades. It was about what truly mattered to him, the legacy of his roots. At first, people were skeptical. News outlets and fans alike questioned the authenticity of the gesture. Was this just another PR move? Another calculated attempt to improve his public image? But as the details unfolded, the true nature of Michael's decision became clear. This wasn't about his fame or his wealth. This was a personal choice, a reflection of his understanding of the importance of roots and community. He had lived in that house, played in that driveway, and spent countless hours there with his family. It had shaped him into the man he became. And now, he was giving that gift to a family who, like him, needed the security and peace of mind that only a home could provide. The family, who had once been unsure of what to make of the situation, soon came to realize the enormity of what had happened. They had never expected such a gift. Their initial shock turned into deep gratitude. They found themselves reflecting on how different their lives had become in the wake of Michael's act. No longer burdened by the pressure of rent or the uncertainty of how they would manage their finances month after month, they could now focus on building their future in a place that had already witnessed so much of Michael's past. The local community was impacted in ways they hadn't anticipated. Wilmington, a small town, had always been proud of Michael's achievements, but they had never expected him to give back in such a direct and personal manner. This act of generosity resonated with the people who had watched him grow up, who had cheered for him during his high school games, and who had followed his every success. For the people of Wilmington, this was a reminder that success didn't always have to be loud or boastful. Sometimes, it was the quiet acts of kindness that made the biggest difference. As the weeks turned into months, Michael continued to stay low-key about his decision. He didn't want the attention. He wasn't looking for praise. What he had done for the family living in his childhood home had come from a place of sincerity, not from a desire to be seen as a philanthropist. But over time, the story became more than just about him. It became about the power of giving, about showing others that kindness could have a lasting impact. The family, now living rent-free, had made the house their own. The sense of security they felt was evident in the way they carried themselves. They no longer had to worry about finding the money to pay rent. Instead, they could focus on their children's education, their work, and building the kind of future that would allow them to pay it forward someday. The family had made the house their home in ways that went beyond the physical structure. They had added their own memories to the walls, their own stories to the space that had once belonged to Michael. Despite the significance of what had been given to them, the family remained humble. They knew the house had changed their lives, but they also understood that Michael's gesture wasn't a one-time event. It was a reminder that there were still people in the world who cared about others. It wasn't about charity. It was about offering them the chance to live with dignity and hope, something Michael had experienced when he was young. For Michael, the feeling of fulfillment came from seeing the family thrive. He wasn't seeking recognition, but seeing them settle into the home that had once belonged to him gave him a sense of peace. The house had been a symbol of his past, a place where he had struggled, learned, and grown. But now it had become a symbol of something bigger, a new beginning for another family, a place where dreams could take root, just as his had. It was moments like these that reminded Michael of why he had always strived to be more than just a basketball player. His accomplishments on the court were undoubtedly legendary, but they didn't define him. They were a part of him, yes, but not the whole story. He had always believed that his success wasn't just for him, it was for the people who had supported him, who had believed in him when no one else did. And now, with this simple act, Michael was giving something back to the community that had raised him. It wasn't about money or recognition. It was about making a difference in a way that was lasting, meaningful, and real. As time passed, Michael's connection to Wilmington remained strong. He didn't return to the house often, it wasn't necessary. What mattered was that the family who lived there now had a stable foundation to build their lives upon. And as the family continued to live in the house, they began to learn more about the significance of where they were living. They would find small traces of Michael's past, his old basketball trophies, family photographs tucked away in corners, and pieces of memorabilia from his early days as a young athlete with big dreams. But even more powerful than these physical remnants was the knowledge that Michael Jordan, the man who had become a global legend, had once walked these same floors as a young boy, striving for something greater. In the end, Michael Jordan's gesture was far more than just an act of charity. It was a message that even the smallest acts of kindness could have an enduring impact. It wasn't about giving away wealth or seeking accolades. It was about showing that the true measure of success lay not in what you accumulate for yourself, but in what you give back to others. Through this quiet act of generosity, Michael had shown the world that greatness didn't only come from championships or MVP awards, it came from the ability to make a difference in someone else's life. He didn't need to be praised or acknowledged for what he had done. The fulfillment came from knowing that the family who now called his childhood home their own had been given the chance to create a better future for themselves. And as the years went by, the house on East 12th Street stood not just as a piece of real estate, but as a symbol of something much larger, a legacy of humility, generosity, and the importance of giving back to those who had helped shape you. Michael Jordan's impact would always be measured by more than the number of championships he won. It would be measured by the quiet, lasting difference he had made in the lives of others. As the months passed since Michael Jordan's quiet act of generosity, the impact of his decision continued to ripple through the community in Wilmington. At first, it was just a whispered story among the locals, an unexpected gesture from the man who had once been a young, aspiring basketball player in their town. But as time went on, it became clear that Michael's return to his roots had been more than just an isolated event. It was a catalyst for change, a reminder of the power of kindness and the lasting influence one person could have on others. For the family now living in Michael's childhood home, life had taken a turn for the better. What had once been a house full of uncertainty had transformed into a place of stability and opportunity. They had been struggling financially, like many families, uncertain about how they would make ends meet each month. The stress of paying rent and worrying about their future had been a constant weight on their shoulders. But now, with the house securely theirs, rent no longer hung over them like a dark cloud. For the first time in a long while, they could breathe easy. The family, who had initially been shocked by Michael's gesture, slowly began to appreciate the deeper significance of what had happened. The house wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of resilience, a place where dreams could take root. They weren't just living in any house, they were living in a place where greatness had been born. And with that realization came a new sense of responsibility. They didn't want to squander the opportunity they had been given. Instead, they embraced the gift with gratitude and began to make the most of it. The couple, who had always dreamed of a better future for their children, now saw that future within reach. They worked harder, saved more, and focused on giving their kids the kind of life they had always hoped for. Education became a priority, and they made sure to create a stable, nurturing environment for their children to grow up in. The house, once a mere place to live, had become a foundation for something more, a launching pad for a new chapter in their lives. What had begun as a simple gesture from Michael Jordan had snowballed into something much larger than anyone could have predicted. His act of generosity had set off a chain reaction that inspired the family and the community to focus on the values that truly mattered: family, hard work, and the importance of giving back. Wilmington, which had always been proud of its connection to Michael, now felt even more connected to him, not through his basketball accomplishments, but through his humanity. The local community began to rally around Michael's story. People who had known him as a young boy in Wilmington felt a renewed sense of pride. It wasn't just about his career or his legendary status in basketball, it was about the man he had become. Michael's actions had reminded them of the importance of looking out for each other, of offering support when it was needed most. His gesture had not only impacted the family living in his childhood home but had also rekindled a sense of unity within the town. People who had once been skeptical of celebrities' philanthropic acts began to see the value in quiet gestures. Michael's story wasn't about a grand donation or a flashy charity event, it was about a man who had achieved greatness but had never forgotten where he came from. He had returned to the place that had shaped him, not to bask in the glow of his past, but to offer something that truly mattered: security, stability, and a chance for others to build a better future. In the months following the restoration of the house, more and more people in Wilmington began to share their own stories of how Michael had touched their lives. Some recalled how he had helped them as children, giving them the confidence to pursue their own dreams. Others remembered his quiet acts of kindness, the moments when he had gone out of his way to make someone's day a little brighter. The legacy of Michael Jordan, the basketball player, was undeniable. But it was the legacy of Michael Jordan, the man, that left the deepest mark on Wilmington. The family who now lived in his childhood home continued to make improvements to the property. They didn't just want to live there, they wanted to honor the space and the history that it represented. They planted a garden in the backyard, where Michael had once shot hoops. They put up a new basketball hoop for their children, continuing the tradition that had started all those years ago. And in the evenings, they would sit on the porch and reflect on how their lives had changed. They never took for granted the gift they had been given, and they knew that, in some small way, they had been part of something much bigger than themselves. Michael, for his part, never sought attention for his actions. He didn't return to Wilmington often. The house no longer belonged to him in a physical sense, but it had become part of his story in a way that could never be erased. He had given the family the chance to live without fear, without anxiety about the next rent payment. That was enough. It was what mattered most to him. But even if Michael never returned, the legacy of his gesture would live on. The story of how he had quietly purchased his childhood home and allowed a family to stay there rent-free became a story of inspiration, not just for Wilmington, but for anyone who heard it. It was a story of humility, of looking beyond one's own success to help others in meaningful ways. In many ways, Michael had become a symbol, not just of athletic excellence, but of what it meant to be a good person. He had proved that greatness wasn't about trophies or championships. It wasn't about how many people cheered for you or how many records you set. True greatness, he had shown, came from the simple, quiet acts of kindness that changed lives. And by offering his childhood home to a family in need, he had demonstrated that his legacy was one of generosity, compassion, and a deep connection to the place that had shaped him. Years later, the family would reflect on that day, the day Michael Jordan knocked on their door, and they would remember the impact it had on their lives. They would tell their children about the man who had given them a gift they could never repay, a gift that had changed their future. And as they passed down the story, they would remind their children that sometimes the most powerful legacies are the ones that are built quietly, without fanfare or recognition. Michael's legacy was a reminder that we all have the power to make a difference, no matter how big or small. And that, ultimately, is what makes a life truly great. As the years passed, Michael Jordan's quiet gesture continued to resonate far beyond the confines of his childhood home in Wilmington. His decision to buy the house, to restore it, and to let a family live there rent-free had sparked something much larger than anyone could have anticipated. It wasn't just a charitable act, it was a symbol of something deeper, something fundamental to Michael's character, his understanding of the power of giving back and his connection to his roots. The family living in the house had begun to thrive. What was once a space filled with uncertainty had now become a true home, where dreams could be nurtured, where opportunities could be seized. The couple who had struggled for years with the financial pressures of renting now found themselves with a foundation of security. Their children were flourishing in an environment that was stable and filled with possibility. The weight of rent had been lifted, and in its place was the freedom to focus on their futures. They enrolled their children in extracurricular activities, saved for college, and made plans for the future. What had seemed impossible before was now within reach. For Michael, the impact of his gesture wasn't something he sought to measure. He didn't need to hear the gratitude or see the success of the family to know that he had made the right decision. The satisfaction came from knowing that he had given someone the chance to live without fear, to have the security that he had once had as a child. He had always understood the value of a stable home, the sense of belonging, the feeling of safety, and the space in which to dream. And now, he had passed that on. Yet, Michael's gesture had ripple effects far beyond that family. As more people in Wilmington and beyond heard the story, it became clear that Michael's impact was more than just the tangible act of giving away a house. It was about the message it sent, that true greatness wasn't just about accolades or trophies, it was about the quiet, everyday acts of kindness that shaped the lives of others. In the community, the story of Michael's generosity became a point of pride. People saw in it a reflection of the values that had always been central to Wilmington: hard work, humility, and an understanding of the importance of community. Michael had never forgotten where he came from, and this act of giving back was a testament to that. For the people who had watched him grow up, the story was a reminder that the same Michael who had dazzled the world with his basketball skills had also made a lasting impact on his hometown by living up to the very values that had shaped him as a young man. The local media began to cover the story with more attention. At first, they had treated it as a curious footnote, a famous athlete returning to his roots. But as the story unfolded, it became clear that this was something more profound. The narrative of Michael Jordan's generosity, not as a grand public gesture but as a personal decision, became an inspiration for many. People began to reflect on their own actions, their own capacity to give, and what they could do to help others. Michael had set an example, one that was far more meaningful than the typical headlines surrounding athletes and their charity work. This was about offering something real, something that couldn't be measured by the size of a donation or the fame of the person giving it. As the years passed, the house itself became a symbol in Wilmington, a place where people gathered, a place where the history of Michael Jordan's beginnings was still very much alive. While it wasn't a tourist attraction or a place for fans to gawk, it held a quiet significance. It stood as a reminder of what it meant to give back and to never forget where you came from. It wasn't about Michael, the basketball legend. It was about Michael, the person who cared about his community, about his roots, and about making a difference in the lives of others. The family, who had become the new stewards of the house, continued to honor the space by making it their own. They weren't living in the shadow of Michael Jordan's past. They were living in a house that had given them the opportunity to build their own future. They maintained the yard, keeping it tidy and welcoming, and they proudly told their friends and neighbors about the man who had given them this extraordinary gift. Their children grew up knowing the story of Michael Jordan's generosity, and they, in turn, began to understand the deeper meaning of kindness and the importance of community. In the meantime, Michael continued with his life, managing his business ventures and occasionally returning to Wilmington for personal visits. His public persona had become that of a businessman and philanthropist, yet he always carried with him the humility that had defined his character from the beginning. He remained close with his family and his roots, even as his fame took him around the world. The house in Wilmington, though not a focal point of his life, remained a quiet testament to who he was, a man who had never lost sight of what mattered most. Despite his fame and success, Michael had always felt a deep connection to his hometown. The house, once a simple space where he had grown up, had come to represent more than just a physical location. It had become a symbol of everything that had shaped him. The lessons learned in that house were the same lessons that had guided him throughout his career: the value of hard work, the importance of family, and the understanding that success wasn't just about what you achieved for yourself, but what you could give to others. One of the most powerful aspects of Michael's decision was the simplicity of it. In a world where acts of charity often come with a public spotlight, where donations are made with the expectation of recognition, Michael had quietly given away something of great personal value. He had restored a piece of his history, not for himself, but for someone else. He had used his success not to elevate his own status, but to improve the lives of others in a way that was deeply meaningful. As time went on, more people in Wilmington came to realize the true nature of Michael's gift. It wasn't about the house itself. It was about the meaning behind it. Michael had shown the world that greatness wasn't defined by the records you set or the championships you won. It was defined by the lives you touched, the people you helped, and the legacy you left behind. Years later, when people spoke of Michael Jordan's impact, they would still talk about his incredible basketball achievements, but they would also speak of his quiet generosity. They would speak of the man who returned to his roots, who never forgot where he came from, and who used his success to make the world a better place. Michael's story had become more than just one of athletic achievement. It had become a story of what it meant to be truly great. As time moved forward, Michael Jordan's act of generosity continued to shape the lives of those who had been directly impacted by his quiet gesture. Though he had never sought the public's approval or attention, the ripples from his decision to buy his childhood home and allow a family to live there rent-free continued to grow. The story of his kindness had transcended its initial form as a simple charitable act, becoming a deeply woven part of the fabric of his legacy. It was a living testament to the kind of man he had always been, far beyond the athlete the world knew. For the family living in the house, their lives had been irrevocably changed. They had always dreamed of a better life for themselves and their children, but like many, they had been held back by the constraints of their finances. Rent had always been an insurmountable hurdle, a reminder of their limitations. But with the weight of those concerns lifted, they now looked at their future with new eyes. They were no longer living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to keep up with the demands of modern life. They could focus on their children's education, save for their future, and plan for long-term stability. What had once been a place where they lived out of necessity had become a home where they could dream again. They made the most of their new situation. The children excelled in school, taking advantage of the opportunities afforded to them without the distraction of constant financial worry. The parents worked hard to create a nurturing, supportive environment where their children could thrive. The family's success was no longer tethered to the unpredictable weight of rent. Instead, they were building their future with the same work ethic that Michael Jordan had demonstrated throughout his life. They took pride in the home that had been given to them, not just because of the material benefits it provided, but because of what it represented. It was a place where they could flourish, where they could pursue their dreams without being bogged down by the barriers that had held them back for so long. The community of Wilmington also saw the effects of Michael's gesture in a broader, more lasting sense. Wilmington had always been proud of its connection to Michael. He was more than just a local basketball legend. He was a symbol of hard work, perseverance, and success. His rise from a local high school player to one of the greatest athletes the world had ever seen was a story of inspiration for the entire town. But it wasn't just his success that people in Wilmington celebrated, it was the way he remained rooted in the place that had shaped him. His decision to return, to offer something of real, lasting value to a family in need, deepened his connection to the town. As the story of Michael's generosity spread, it inspired many in the community to think differently about their own roles in the lives of others. His actions were a reminder that the impact we have on others isn't necessarily measured by the size of the gifts we give, but by the thoughtfulness behind them. Michael didn't need to make a huge donation to a national charity or host a highly publicized event to demonstrate his commitment to his community. Instead, he had made a personal decision to help those around him in the most tangible way possible. He had given them a home, a place to live without the constant worry of bills, a place to raise their children and build their futures. And that simple, quiet act of generosity became a source of pride for the entire town. As the family continued to settle into their new life, they became more involved in the community. They volunteered at local schools, helped out at neighborhood events, and participated in initiatives that focused on helping others in need. They understood the value of what they had been given, and they wanted to pass on that same kindness to others. The ripple effect of Michael Jordan's decision was becoming more and more apparent. His act of kindness had not only changed the lives of one family but had encouraged an entire community to think differently about how they could support each other. Michael himself, though still largely private about the matter, couldn't help but be moved by the changes he saw in Wilmington. He had never expected anything in return for his actions. His gesture had been motivated by a deep sense of wanting to give back, to share something meaningful with others. But over time, he saw how it had sparked a renewed sense of community, how it had inspired others to reach out and help those around them. The impact of his decision was far greater than he had ever imagined, and he took quiet satisfaction in knowing that the people of Wilmington were stronger and more connected because of it. For Michael, the legacy of his career had always been about more than just basketball. His impact on the game, on the culture of the sport, was undeniable, but he also knew that his real legacy would be defined by the way he treated people. He had often been criticized for his competitive nature, for his single-minded pursuit of greatness. But in moments like this one, it became clear that his true greatness lay not in his basketball skills, but in his ability to touch the lives of others in profound, lasting ways. And so, the house remained a symbol, not of the past, but of the present and future. It was no longer just a house that had belonged to Michael Jordan, it had become a home for a family that had been given a chance at a new beginning. It was a reminder to them, and to the entire town, that greatness was not defined by trophies or accolades, but by the lives we touch and the ways we make a difference. Years passed, and the story of Michael Jordan's quiet act of generosity became a part of Wilmington's history. It was a story that would be told for generations, passed down as a testament to the power of kindness and the lasting impact of one person's decision to give back. It was a story that would inspire not just the people of Wilmington, but anyone who heard it, to think about what they could do to make a positive impact in the world. Michael's story had become more than just his own, it had become everyone's story. As time moved forward, Michael Jordan's legacy continued to evolve. His influence on the world of basketball remained unparalleled, but it was the quieter, less visible parts of his life that would come to define him in the hearts and minds of those who truly understood the depth of his character. The story of the house, of the family he had helped, would forever be woven into the narrative of who he was. It was a story that was never meant to be told for glory or recognition. It was a story about giving, about community, and about the simple, lasting impact one person can have on the world. And so, as the sun set over Wilmington each evening, the house on East 12th Street stood as a beacon, a reminder that true greatness comes from the ways we uplift and support one another. Michael Jordan had not only changed the game of basketball, he had changed the lives of those who needed it most. Through his quiet act of generosity, he had built a legacy that would live on far beyond his time on the court. As Michael Jordan continued to watch his story unfold from the quiet corners of his own life, he saw the long-term effects of the decision he had made years earlier. Though it had started as a deeply personal gesture, buying his childhood home and letting a family live there rent-free, it had turned into something much greater than he had ever imagined. The impact rippled through the community of Wilmington and beyond. His action had transcended the boundaries of philanthropy, becoming a symbol of what it meant to truly give back. It wasn't just the family who had benefited, although their lives had been irrevocably altered. The family had found a new sense of security. They had spent years struggling, but the weight of their worries had been lifted. With the gift of a home, they had gained stability and peace of mind that allowed them to focus on what really mattered, on their children's education, on improving their lives, and on building a better future. They were living in a place that had once been a symbol of Michael's own humble beginnings, but for them, it was now a fresh start. They had made the most of their second chance, growing in ways they had once thought impossible. As the years passed, the house became a place of transformation, not just for the family but for the entire neighborhood. The impact of Michael's gesture wasn't lost on Wilmington. In a town where people tended to stay out of the limelight, Michael's decision to quietly help a family in need resonated deeply with the people around him. It became a powerful reminder that there was more to greatness than public achievements and global recognition. True greatness was about the ways you could impact others, the ways you could give without expecting anything in return. The story of Michael's generosity slowly spread, reaching beyond the borders of Wilmington. It became a story that people shared as an example of how we can all make a difference in the lives of others, no matter our position in life. For some, it was a beacon of hope, a sign that there were still people who cared enough to make a lasting impact. For others, it was an inspiration to step up in their own communities and offer what they could, whether it was a kind word, a helping hand, or a gift that changed a family's life forever. Michael had always understood that the roots of his success lay not just in his basketball talent, but in the way he had been raised. The lessons his family had instilled in him, discipline, hard work, and the value of community, had shaped him into the man he had become. What Michael hadn't anticipated was that those same values would be the foundation of the legacy he would leave behind. It wasn't just his championship rings or his title of greatest of all time that would define him, it was the way he had connected with the people who had supported him, the way he had quietly given back to the place that had made him who he was. The more people learned about Michael's gesture, the more they began to look at his legacy in a different light. He wasn't just the basketball superstar they had cheered for, he was the man who had come back to his roots and made a real difference in someone's life. He had used his success to give back in a way that was both profound and personal. It wasn't about wealth or fame, it was about using his position to offer a gift that would last for generations. His actions spoke volumes about his character, about his understanding of what truly mattered in life. The family who had received the house continued to pay it forward. They hadn't simply accepted the gift with gratitude and moved on. Instead, they had taken the spirit of Michael's generosity to heart and had become active members of the community. They volunteered their time, donated to causes that meant something to them, and helped others who were in situations similar to the one they had once faced. They understood that the gift Michael had given them wasn't just about the house, it was about the opportunity to do something good for others. They had made their home a reflection of the values Michael had passed on to them, a space where kindness and community were at the forefront. Michael, for his part, remained humble. His success had always been about pushing the boundaries of what was possible on the court, but in this act, he had pushed the boundaries of what it meant to truly give. He wasn't concerned with accolades or recognition. He had given because it was the right thing to do. And that was the essence of who Michael Jordan was, not just a man who played basketball at an elite level, but the man who had used his platform to help others in ways that were more meaningful than any trophy could ever represent. As the years went on, Michael's quiet influence began to spread even further. Other athletes, business leaders, and individuals in positions of power began to take note of his approach to philanthropy. They saw that Michael wasn't simply writing a check to a charity or throwing money at a cause, he was engaging with the people he was helping, understanding their needs, and finding ways to make a tangible difference. His example became a blueprint for others who wanted to make an impact, but didn't know where to start. They learned from his humility, his focus on the long-term impact, and his commitment to giving without seeking glory. In Wilmington, the house continued to stand as a symbol, not just of Michael's past, but of the future. It had once been a place where a young boy had dreamed of playing basketball at the highest level. Now, it was a place where a family was building their own dreams. And as the family's children grew, they began to understand the significance of the gift Michael had given them. They learned about the man who had been a part of their home's history, and they understood the importance of carrying that legacy forward. The house wasn't just a physical structure, it was a living, breathing part of Wilmington's story. It had seen generations of families pass through its doors, each leaving their mark in their own way. For Michael, the house would always be a part of his past, but for the family who now lived there, it was a place where they could build their own future. The gift of that home had provided them with more than just a roof over their heads. It had given them the freedom to dream, to work hard, and to succeed. As Michael reflected on the years that had passed, he realized that the legacy of his childhood home was not about the fame or the wealth he had accumulated over the years. It was about the relationships he had built, the lives he had touched, and the opportunities he had created for others. The house was a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could change the course of someone's life. And so, the story of Michael Jordan's childhood home, and the family who had been given a chance to live in it, became more than just a chapter in his own life. It became a symbol of what it meant to give back, to support others, and to always remember where you came from. It was a legacy built on generosity, humility, and the enduring power of community. As Michael Jordan sat quietly in his office, reflecting on the years that had passed since he had made the decision to buy his childhood home, he couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. He had lived a life filled with accolades, championships, and global recognition, but it was the small, personal moments like this one that had truly defined his legacy. The story of the house, the family who had been given the chance to live there rent-free, had become an integral part of his life. And as time went on, it had become much more than just a story. It had become a reminder of what truly mattered in life. For the family living in the house, their life had been transformed in ways they could never have imagined. What had once been a home filled with uncertainty and financial struggle had become a place of stability and hope. They had thrived in the years since Michael's gesture, their children excelling in school, their dreams growing as the weight of financial worry was lifted. They had become part of the community in Wilmington, giving back as they had been given. The house had become more than just a place to live, it had become a cornerstone of their journey toward a better life. The community of Wilmington had also changed in subtle ways. Michael's act of kindness had sparked a sense of unity and pride among the people who had watched him grow up. His success on the basketball court had always been a source of local pride, but it was this quiet, behind-the-scenes act of generosity that had left the deepest mark. It had reminded everyone that true greatness wasn't measured by championships or records, it was measured by the impact you had on the lives of others, by the ways you could uplift and support those in need. In the years since Michael's gesture, the story of the house had become a legend in Wilmington. It wasn't just a tale about a famous athlete returning to his roots. It was a story about the power of giving, about the long-lasting effects of kindness, and about how one person's decision could change the course of multiple lives. The house had become a symbol of hope, not only for the family who lived there but for everyone who heard the story. It had reminded people that no matter how far they had come, no matter how much they had achieved, they could always make a difference. Michael had never sought recognition for what he had done. He had never wanted a plaque or a ceremony in his honor. His reward came not from public acknowledgement, but from knowing that the family who lived in the house was thriving, that they were able to build a future without the constant fear of financial instability. His reward came from seeing the ripple effect of his gesture, how it had inspired others to give, to help, and to create a sense of community that transcended the material. In many ways, Michael had come full circle. His life had taken him to the heights of fame and fortune, but in the end, he had returned to his roots. He had given back to the place that had shaped him, the place where his dreams had first taken root. The house had been the foundation of his journey, and now, it was the foundation for another family's future. It was a powerful reminder that no matter how far you went, you should never forget where you came from. And as Michael sat back in his chair, looking out the window at the setting sun, he realized that this was the legacy he had always hoped to leave behind, not just the record-breaking achievements, not just the trophies, but the quiet acts of generosity that would have a lasting impact on the world. He had always wanted to be remembered not only as a basketball legend but as a man who cared about the people around him, who used his success to make the world a better place. The story of the house was a fitting conclusion to his journey. It wasn't about grand gestures or accolades. It was about something more fundamental, something that transcended basketball and touched the hearts of those who heard it. It was a story of humility, kindness, and the importance of giving back. Michael had shown the world that greatness wasn't just about what you achieved for yourself, it was about what you did for others. It was about leaving a legacy that would endure long after the spotlight had faded. The family who had been given the chance to live in the house would continue to thrive. They had made the most of the opportunity Michael had given them, and their children would carry on the values of hard work, humility, and generosity that had been passed down to them. They would always remember the man who had changed their lives, and they would share his story with future generations, ensuring that the message of kindness and community would live on. As for Michael, his legacy would continue to evolve. He had built a career that had changed the landscape of basketball, but it was his actions outside the game that would define him in the hearts of those who truly knew him. The house, now a symbol of his generosity, would stand as a testament to the idea that sometimes the most powerful acts are the ones that are done quietly, without fanfare or expectation. The story had come full circle, and Michael had found the peace he had been seeking. He had achieved everything he had set out to accomplish in basketball, but it was this quiet, humble act that would leave the most lasting impression on the world. It wasn't about the titles or the records, it was about the difference he had made in the lives of others. And as the years went by, that difference would continue to echo through the lives of those who had been touched by his generosity. The house on East 12th Street would stand for years to come, not just as a physical structure, but as a symbol of the power of kindness, the enduring strength of community, and the legacy of a man who had never forgotten where he came from. Michael Jordan's final gift wasn't one of wealth or fame, it was one of heart, of connection, and of the knowledge that greatness, in its purest form, is measured by the lives you change. In the end, that was the story he would want told, the story of a man who reached the highest heights of success, only to return to the place that had shaped him, and give back in the most meaningful way he knew how. It was a story that would inspire generations to come, a story of a legacy that would never fade.